I want to go across to Pramit Chaudhuri. He heads the Eurasia Group. The Eurasia Group, for those who don't know, is essentially about global geopolitical risk, right? So we've just seen this infrastructure initiative, Pramit, that talks about India, the Middle East and Europe coming together in this infrastructure project. To what extent do you think this is meant to serve as a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative of Beijing?
So the different members that have joined these various Persian Gulf, should we say, strategic infrastructure groups, the one that is now being effectively driven by Saudi Arabia, and the earlier one, which in many ways is actually the same, conflated together, led by UAE, the ITU2. I would argue that the Gulf countries do not see this as about fighting China. They see this as about building a regional architecture designed to stabilize their region, especially as the United States leaves or reduces its exposure, if you wish, to the Middle East. But the other countries, definitely India, the United States, see this as basically, if anybody other than China is prepared to build infrastructure in key parts of the world, then automatically this benefits their strategic concerns about China.
Can you explain Saudi Arabia's role in this, given that Saudi Arabia has been forging deeper ties with China on another plane, also being a part of this India-US Mid-East corridor? So where do you think the Crown Prince is coming out on this?
I think the Crown Prince is seeing this as part of his larger strategy of modernizing, if you wish, Saudi Arabia and preparing it for a post-hydrocarbon or post-oil and gas future. He knows that while this is going to keep producing dividends for at least maybe 2 more generations, at some point this is not going to be where the world is. This is not where the world is going in terms of green energy and so on. So you see him trying to force his country to modernize rapidly. And part of that modernization process is that I want Saudi Arabia to be a part of a global infrastructure system where container traffic, trade, investment, data, green hydrogen technology, where startups in Israel and financiers in India and vice versa meet in Riyadh or in Dubai to do their business. And this is going to be the heart of the new Saudi Arabia, this new futuristic city, Neom, that he's building, for example, and so on. And this is a key element of that strategy. The UAE has a similar one. In many ways, the two of them, I would argue, are two sides of the same coin. But it's very clear for them that India is a crucial element to this strategy. And therefore, that's why they're bringing them in. But they also see China as part of this. China has the money, it has certain types of technology. They're not interested in this being part of a great power rivalry game. They see this as being a sort of liberal internationalist construct for the Middle East. Now, whether that will survive a US-China or even a Sino-Indian conflict or a rivalry is harder to tell. But for the time being, all of the components, all of the member stakeholders in this see this as being to their benefit.
The fact that India has been able to rally the G20 and come up with this outcome joint declaration, how do you think Xi Jinping sitting in Beijing would be decoding this?
So this is separate from the G20. Keep that in mind, what Saudi Arabia...
No, of course. Sure, I'm just saying, how would Xi be decoding all that's played out in Delhi?
So for Xi, I would argue for China, what we're seeing clearly with China is a decision to slowly develop as much as possible an alternative international structure that is effectively not Western dominated. So you build up the BRICS, you're trying to build up the BRICS as a sort of G7 minus the West. You've seen China try to change the direction of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and effectively marginalizing Russia within that system, but moving into things like digital space and infrastructure, which was not originally designed to do. The G20 is a difficult part for China. Now, if you look at the history of the G20, you'll notice that Chinese leaders, Xi Jinping and the top-level Chinese leaders, have missed the summit before. And I would argue what they're now looking at the G20 and saying half the members of the G20 are hostile to us and Russia. The other 8 are trying to leverage that hostility between the 2 and the 10 to extract from us. So does the G20 really make sense for China to be investing in it? On top of that, it happens to be hosted by India at a time when the Sino-Indian relationship is not in great shape. So for the Chinese, yes, they have to be part of the G20. There's really no alternative there. But I would argue he's looking at this and say, I don't want this to succeed beyond a certain point. But on the other hand, what I think India was able to do diplomatically was almost completely isolate China within the G20. And from what I've heard, even Russia was very reluctant to basically humiliate India. They said, no, India is our friend. We're not interested in going down this path. So in the end, China had to concede. They watered down a lot of things. But ultimately, at this summit at least, China had to allow some things to go through because they simply couldn't get enough support for their position.
Just as well that he stayed away, because if he'd been here and not very happy being here, he would have tried, and she, you know, there's so much commentary around him now having this emperor complex, would have wanted China and himself to be the cynosure of the G20, but you're at Modi's party, you're at India's party, that most certainly cannot be the case, and that's not something that would have gone down well with Xi Jinping. It also suggests very publicly and internationally that ties between India and China are at a low. Where do they go from here? Those are very big challenges and concerns because they're our neighbor in the north, there's no going away from them, and that with China, America is sitting really far away. And therefore, relations with China getting worse is bad, but that's still some geographical distance away for India. That isn't the case. So that is a pressing reality. I want to ask Navdeep Suri about, what do you think Xi Jinping would be making of the fact that Prime Minister Modi has this Delhi outcome, the fact that there is a counter to the BRI, it will take shape and form, but like with the Quad, the signaling is very strong and the signaling is very direct and clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll probably see a lot of envy and discomfort in Beijing today. I saw one report which said on social media in China, Bharat and India were the most searched terms today. So clearly, not just the government, but at the ordinary public level also, the G20 summit is being followed. I think they've scored a bit of an own goal by not showing up and not really assigning any particular reason for it. Pramit's put the reasons very succinctly. I would just add to what Pramit said that China wants to control the environment. It wants to be in a space where the great emperor can dominate rather than be in a situation where there are elements that he can't control. And in this gathering, certainly, there are enough countries that have reason to be unhappy with Chinese actions, particularly most recently, the egregious map that they put out. What's the point of doing that on the eve of the G20 summit and getting the reactions?
Do you buy the argument that this is just a routine process? I mean, Modi and Xi just met at Johannesburg. She was expected, at least at that moment, to come to Delhi, and they come up with these maps which see a huge pushback from ASEAN countries as well. Is that just like routine government bureaucratic procedure, or do you think it's not as simple as that?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think, there seems to be a continuum. When you look at the talks that were taking place, which went on for 4 days, 5 days this time, between the armed forces to try and come across some via media for a disengagement, and it didn't seem to work out. Then you looked at the very disparate statements, the readouts that came out of the Johannesburg meeting, whichever way you describe it, and then his not coming here. We can say that his absence has nothing to do with India, but he clearly, when you look at the events that took place before, this is not a place that he would want to be in, not just for India, but because of the United States, the issues that they are facing on technology and everything else. Australia is there, with its own problems with China. So he doesn't probably want to be in an environment where he can be accosted by other countries bilaterally on some of the issues on which China has been so aggressive.
And the only person who does that is an emperor, not somebody who is elected and accountable, but somebody who thinks he's above and beyond it all, not just within his country, but internationally. Been making
Chairman for life.
Big mistake after another, the handling of the COVID, the reopening of the economy, the total lockdowns. When you have diversity and plurality of opinion, you have different voices on the table and they say things which may be counter to your opinion and help moderate decision making. But when you're the only man in town who matters and nobody else has the courage to speak up to you and against you, then you do crazy things and your country pays and suffers. So that is also the reality. We're going to take a quick break. I am told I have a millets meal waiting at home since there's been so much talk about millets. There's now millets on the menu back home, so I have to go get that. But our teams are on the ground. We're tracking this very, very closely. And hopefully, Sanjeev Kapoor will actually deliver on that promise.
We're gonna take him up on that. Yes, we're taking a very quick break, but there are a few leaders who still haven't arrived, or at least we don't think that they have.
Can't now be coming.
Waiting on them, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. We have to find out where.
But they're also the ones who are not particularly happy. See, Trudeau's not here. Erdogan's not here.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who.
Also the Saudi head of state. So we'll have to wait on that. We'll see where they are.
Okay. So we'll track all of that. We've got some cracker of a conversation. They're very chuffed. Charged up, Amitabh Khan speaking just moments before he went for the Rashtrapati's dinner. We've got Hardeep Puri speaking to us. We have Nitin Gadkari talking about the Biofuels Alliance. He's been the one original advocate of biofuels long before it became fashionable to utter the words. So we'll have all of that and our coverage, and it continues non-stop. We've got millets waiting, but everyone else is here on the job, tracking the story for you. There'll also be images of all these leaders coming out, and then we start early in the morning tracking day 2 of the big G20 summit. The Prime Minister told the India Today group that this would be the catalyst of a new world order. There were Cassandras who thought that India wouldn't be able to bring consensus. There wouldn't be a joint communique. That's happened. This so far has gone better than people may have expected. Let's see what day 2 brings.